Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. We're going to be tackling something really interesting today. It's actually pretty crucial to, in this day and age, we're talking about using advanced machine learning, like really advanced stuff to catch fraudsters. And I think the sources you sent me this time are particularly fascinating.
Yeah, I agree. These sources give us a glimpse into how data scientists are building these complex systems. There's a really interesting mock interview transcript in here where we get to hear a candidate walk through their approach to fraud detection, and they really dig into a lot of interesting things: unsupervised learning, semi-supervised learning, all that good stuff.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And what we're going to try to do in this deep dive is really like unpack these ideas, right? How do these complex methods turn into actual tools for identifying people trying to, well, cheat the system? Like we're going to be looking at some really innovative approaches, from like teaching machines to recognize normal activity to like building these intricate networks that can reveal like hidden connections between things that seem totally unrelated at first glance.
Absolutely. So to give you a roadmap, we're going to start with autoencoders. These are neural networks that learn to reconstruct typical data and then flag anything that deviates from that learned pattern. Then we'll move on to isolation forests, which are a clever way of pinpointing outliers. And finally, we'll dive into graph-based techniques like graph neural networks, GNNs, which are really good at uncovering those complex fraudulent behavior patterns.
Okay, so let's jump into it. Let's start with autoencoders. Now, if I understand it correctly, the basic idea here is you train a neural network on like a huge data set of legitimate transactions. The system learns to recognize what's considered normal, right? And then when it encounters something that's off, like unusual, the reconstruction error, how poorly the autoencoder recreates the input, that's basically a big red flag.
Right, exactly. The candidate in our source material specifically mentions a preference for deep autoencoders. These are autoencoders with dense layers, and they use ReLU activation functions in those hidden layers. Now, ReLU is important because it helps avoid the vanishing gradient problem in deep networks. And they also use a sigmoid output layer, which, that's pretty standard when your input data is normalized. Make sure the output stays in a consistent range.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, one thing that caught my eye was that they don't just pick the size of that central layer, the latent space at random. They really emphasize validating those dimensions using techniques like PCA or TSNE. Why is that validation step so important?
So the key here is to make sure that the reduced representation, the latent space, is actually capturing the essential features of the data. If you skip this validation, your autoencoder might learn a distorted view of normal, right? And that could lead to some serious problems. You might miss subtle fraud that still appears normal to the flawed model. Or, on the flip side, you might start flagging legitimate but unusual transactions as fraud. So validating the latent space is crucial for making sure the model is robust and accurate.
Got it. And it sounds like fine-tuning these models is a pretty intricate process. They talk about using Bayesian optimization for the hyperparameters and really emphasize the importance of precision recall curves. So what's the rationale behind those choices?
Well, remember, in fraud detection, you're often dealing with incredibly imbalanced data sets, like a huge number of legitimate transactions and a relatively tiny number of fraudulent ones. If you use something like ROC-AUC, which is a common metric, you might get a really optimistic picture of your model's performance, which is misleading. Precision recall curves, on the other hand, give you a much better understanding of the trade-offs. How well can the model identify all the fraudulent cases versus how often does it incorrectly flag legitimate transactions? And Bayesian optimization is just a really smart way to search for the best hyperparameter values. It helps you find the best settings for your model without having to try every single possible combination.
Right, right. Makes sense. And since fraud is so rare, they also mention using stratified sampling during cross-validation. Can you explain why that's so important?
Sure. This is all about making sure your model can work well on new, unseen data. When you have an imbalanced data set, regular cross-validation might create training and validation sets where some parts have very few or even zero instances of fraud. And that's not good. So stratified sampling ensures that each fold in your cross-validation maintains a realistic proportion of both legitimate and fraudulent transactions, which gives you a much more reliable estimate of how your model will actually perform in the real world.
Okay, that's clear. Now let's shift gears a bit and talk about isolation forests. This seems like a very different approach to fraud detection than autoencoders. So how do they work?
Imagine you're trying to find a weirdly shaped apple in a barrel full of normal apples. You wouldn't have to carefully examine every single apple, right? You could probably spot the odd one out pretty quickly with a few random picks. That's kind of how isolation forests work. They build a bunch of random binary trees and then they measure how many splits it takes to isolate a particular data point. And anomalies, because they are rare and different, they tend to be isolated much faster in fewer steps.
Interesting analogy.
Yeah.
But they did mention one potential issue. Genuine but rare legitimate cases might also get flagged as anomalies. How do you deal with that?
You hit the nail on the head. This is where domain expertise really comes in. You can incorporate business rules into your system. For example, you could exclude high-value transactions from trusted, long-time customers from being flagged. You could also add in other signals like unusual login patterns or sudden changes in spending behavior. These things might be legitimate, but could still be worth investigating. Basically, you're adding a layer of context to the purely statistical analysis.
And what about tuning the contamination parameter? That
Yeah.
sounds tricky.
Yeah, that's the parameter that tells the algorithm how much fraud you expect to see in your data. And the candidate suggests a really interesting approach: simulating fraud. By creating realistic but fake fraud scenarios, you can see how the isolation forest behaves under controlled conditions and then do a sensitivity analysis to see how its performance changes at different contamination levels. That helps you pick a contamination parameter that strikes the right balance between catching fraud and avoiding too many false positives.
Okay, makes sense. All right, let's move on to graph-based methods. I mean, creating a graph for fraud detection sounds like a really visual way to actually connect all those dots, literally. How do you actually build such a graph?
So you start by representing all the different players in a transaction as nodes in your graph. Things like user accounts, the transactions themselves, devices, IP addresses. Then you draw edges or connections between those nodes to show how they relate to each other. For example, users sharing a device, multiple transactions coming from the same IP address, or the flow of money between accounts. And because you've got different types of nodes and connections, this is what we call a heterogeneous graph.
Okay, and once you have this network, what kind of algorithms can you use to spot fraudulent activity?
Well, the candidate mentions a couple of interesting approaches. One is community detection, where you use clustering to find groups of entities that are tightly connected. This can help you identify fraudulent rings or coordinated schemes. And then for graphs that are constantly changing, like when you have new users and transactions happening all the time, they suggest using temporal graph networks in libraries like DGL or PyTorch Geometric. These tools allow you to update your analysis as new data comes in. You don't have to retrain the entire model every time.
Now, GNNs, graph neural networks, seem to be getting a lot of buzz in machine learning these days. How are they being used in fraud detection?
So GNNs, like GraphSage or RGA, are designed to learn directly from the structure of the graph and the features associated with each node. They do this by gathering information from a node's neighbors, which lets them pick up on patterns that go beyond just the individual data points. In fraud detection, this means a GNN can identify suspicious users or transactions, not just based on their own attributes, but also by looking at the behavior of the entities they're connected to in the graph.
And how do you deal with the fact that the graph is constantly changing in real time? That sounds like a technical challenge.
Yeah, it is. And this is where the online updating features of libraries like DGL and PyG come in. Instead of retraining the whole model every time something new happens, you can incrementally update the node embeddings, which are like the learned representations of each entity. And temporal graph networks are really helpful here too, because they're specifically designed to handle data that changes over time. The candidate suggests combining real-time anomaly scoring with periodic batch updates to strike a balance between speed and thoroughness.
All right, let's go back to the problem of false positives for a second. What do you do if your autoencoder is flagging too many legitimate transactions as suspicious?
So the first thing you do is look at the distribution of reconstruction errors coming from the autoencoder. You can use statistical tests like the Kolmogorov-Smirnov test to see if there's been a significant shift in this distribution, which could mean that the patterns of normal behavior have changed. That's called concept drift. If you find concept drift, you'll probably need to retrain your model with more recent data. You can use automated retraining pipelines like TFX for this. And another thing you can do is adjust the anomaly detection threshold dynamically. Like maybe you make it more sensitive during times when there's usually a lot of activity.
Now, what about situations where you don't have a lot of labeled fraud data, but you have tons of unlabeled transactions? That's where semi-supervised learning comes in, right?
Yep.
Things like pseudo-labeling and mix-match. How do those methods help?
You got it. When you're short on labeled data, purely supervised learning can be tough. But semi-supervised techniques like pseudo-labeling let you use all that unlabeled data. You train an initial model on your small labeled data set, and then use that model to predict labels for the unlabeled data. The predictions that the model is really confident about are then treated like real labels, which effectively makes your training dataset bigger. Mixmatch takes this even further with advanced data augmentation and consistency regularization. These methods can uncover subtle patterns of fraud that you might miss with purely unsupervised approaches.
So implementing GNN sounds pretty complicated. What are some of the key things to consider when you're building one?
So, in terms of architecture, heterogeneous GNNs like GraphSage and RGA are usually the best choice because they can handle different types of nodes and edges, which is what you have in a fraud detection graph. Feature selection is also super important. You want to include not just the raw transaction data, but also metadata and maybe even features from other anomaly detection methods you've used. And during training, dealing with the class imbalance is key. You can use techniques like negative sampling and graph augmentation to make sure the model learns effectively. And using weighted loss functions and combining different types of loss functions can help too.
Okay, so we've got all these different pieces, the autoencoder, the isolation forest, the GNN. How do you put them all together into a system that actually works? And how do you make sure that this system is understandable to people who aren't data scientists?
The idea is to create a hybrid ensemble where each model contributes its own perspective. The autoencoder gives you a reconstruction error, the isolation forest gives you an anomaly score, and the GNN gives you a fraud probability. To make sure you're getting diverse signals, you'd monitor diversity metrics across the models. Then you can use a meta-classifier, like logistic regression or a decision tree, to combine those scores into a single fraud risk assessment. And for interpretability, you can use tools like S-Shape and Lime to explain how each feature contributes to the model's output. You can also use anchor explanations to create human-readable rules that tell you why a transaction was flagged.
Okay, that makes sense. So finally, what are some of the common challenges you face when you're actually deploying these methods in the real world?
Well, one big challenge is dealing with high false positive rates. That's especially true for unsupervised learning. You need to constantly monitor performance, use adaptive thresholds, and work closely with domain experts. Another challenge is concept drift, where the nature of fraud changes over time. To handle that, you need to implement real-time drift detection and retraining. And of course, data quality is always important. You need good pre-processing and validation procedures. If you're using semi-supervised learning with limited labeled data, active learning tools can help you get more labeled data efficiently. And as we've talked about, interpretability is really important for getting people to trust the system.
So it sounds like fraud detection is becoming increasingly sophisticated. We're moving beyond those old rule-based systems and using a combination of unsupervised, semi-supervised, and graph-based methods. And the key is not just building these complex models, but also making sure they're tuned properly, they can adapt to changes, and they're transparent and useful in real-world situations.
Exactly. It's a constantly evolving field, and the advances in AI are giving us powerful new tools to stay ahead of the fraudsters.
Which brings me to my final thought for all of you listening. In this ongoing game of cat and mouse between the fraudsters and the systems designed to catch them, what innovations in AI do you think will be most important for staying ahead in the future? It's a fascinating question to consider. And as always, we encourage you to keep exploring these topics. Thanks for joining us for another deep dive.